Imagine yourself in a quiet room, the night air slowly drifting in through a gap, and the only sound you hear is the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. There is nothing urgent, nothing to chase, only a space where you are invited to release the weight of thoughts that clung to you throughout the day. Tonight, we will walk together through a story that flows slowly, a tale that does not demand full attention, but merely allows you to drift within it, like water seeping into the earth. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them remain open in a blank gaze, for both will bring the same calm. Let your body rest comfortably, and imagine that each word that arrives is nothing more than a faint melody that will guide you to the edge of sleep. We are not in a hurry. There is no rigid destination, only a gentle journey through corridors of imagination that will lead you softly from wakefulness into dreams. Take a slow breath and feel the air filling your chest. Then exhale gently, as if every breath carries away a layer of weight clinging to your mind. Tonight is not a harsh night, not a night filled with noise, but a night that embraces you with an unseen softness. Imagine yourself sitting at the mouth of a quiet cave, the moonlight falling to the ground like milk spilled from the sky, illuminating stones that are cold and damp. There is no one there, only you, the pale glow of the moon, and an echo of silence that feels like a distant whisper from the past. Slowly, you feel your body becoming lighter, like dry leaves caught by the autumn wind, drifting without direction, yet still following the flow of nature. The words that reach you tonight are not meant to demand memory or attention, but like water dripping soundlessly from the walls of the cave, marking time in a way that is never rushed. Let yourself be carried into the long flow of this narrative, where ancient history, lives of prehistoric humans, and the mysterious traces they left behind will be whispered with a calm voice, a voice that seeks no absolute answers, only silence filled with questions. Imagine this journey as a long sleep, where every layer of story is an extra blanket covering your body with warmth and safety. We are not speaking of grand things full of noise, but of small details, gentle elements often overlooked by hurried eyes. Imagine the dim light of a torch, the slow movements of shadows on the cave walls, the sound of water dripping from cracks in stone, and the dampness that clings to the air. Imagine the slow footsteps guiding you deeper into a space filled with mystery, but with a rhythm that soothes. Every detail that appears will guide you farther from the clamor of daily life, carrying your awareness slowly into a realm unknown, a realm not dangerous, only faint and quiet. And within that silence, you may find something deeper than just a story. Perhaps only a feeling that the world always holds secrets, secrets that are never fully revealed. So, let go of your grasp on time, release the stiffness in your thoughts, and allow yourself to drift. Because tonight, the moonlit cave filled with ancient whispers will be your space to rest, to surrender, to sleep peacefully while being accompanied by a voice describing things that never truly require an answer. Imagine we walk backward through layers of time, passing through centuries of wars, past kingdoms, and cities that once thrived, until we arrive at a period when history had no writing to record itself. It was around 40,000 years ago, a period archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic, when the first modern humans began leaving signs of their existence in caves that now stand as silent monuments. Picture a deep valley hidden behind a chain of cold mountains, where thick fog rolls in every morning and sunlight barely touches the ground with its dim glow. In that valley lies a great cave, its mouth open toward a river as if waiting for visitors since thousands of years ago. The cave walls are adorned with stalactites dripping clear water, forming small pools on the stone floor. The scent of damp earth mingles with a faint memory of burning wood, though no fire lives there now. As we stand before the cave entrance, we can imagine the shadows of ancient people coming and going, carrying animal hides, carrying torches, carrying songs we cannot understand. They did not write, they left no records and letters, but the cave walls still hold handprints, red lines, figures of animals drawn in dim light, as if trying to speak to a distant future. Yet the message remains vague, for no one truly knows the meaning of the symbols they left. Was it a prayer, a ritual, a record of a hunt, or something entirely different? Tonight, we will let that question linger because answers are not important. What matters is the feeling, the atmosphere, and the awareness that we stand in a space traversed by thousands of generations, each leaving fragile yet real traces. Imagine the river flowing before the cave, its water cold and clear, reflecting moonlight like a cracked mirror. Along its banks grow tall trees, their leaves trembling softly in the night breeze. Wild animals roam, from deer to wild horses, perhaps even cave lions and giant bears, now known only through fossils. The world feels vast and untamed, yet at the same time calm. For its rhythm is not that of hurried modern humans, but of unhurried nature. And within that rhythm, ancient humans lit fires, danced beneath the moonlight, and whispered prayers to a sky they believed was filled with spirits. We will never know their names. We will never know the language they spoke. But their footprints are still felt, like an echo deep within the heart of a silent cave. If we close our eyes for a moment and let imagination wander, we can picture a year without numbers, an age that cannot be counted with calendars or clocks. Time had no boundaries then. It existed only in the cycles of seasons, in the orbit of the moon, in the endless alternation of day and night. Imagine vast forests still wild, filled with the calls of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the growls of animals that no longer live in our world. The forest stretched as far as the eye could see, like a dark green sea without end. In the midst of that forest were faint trails formed by the footsteps of ancient humans, paths that connected water sources with hunting grounds, paths that led them to caves used as shelter. Each trail was like a thin thread woven by thousands of journeys, and if we listened carefully, perhaps we could sense the echoes of those footsteps, though they vanished thousands of years ago. In that time, there were no cities, no kingdoms, no towering stone walls, only small communities living in groups depending on one another for survival. They slept under the stars, lit fires when the night grew colder, and looked up at the sky with questioning eyes. In the heavens, the constellations shone brighter than what we see today, for the world had not yet been drowned in artificial light. Imagine the depth of their wonder toward those stars. Perhaps they saw them as the eyes of spirits, perhaps as signs of direction, perhaps as stories told only through firelight. In the foggy valleys, caves became more than physical shelters. They became spaces where humans tried to understand something greater than themselves. The caves were dark, damp, and filled with the ceaseless sound of dripping water. Yet within that darkness, ancient humans lit torches and painted on stone walls, leaving behind symbols now considered the first artworks of humankind. They used red pigments from clay, black pigments from charcoal, and those simple lines seemed to carry profound meaning for them. We can stand before the image of a bison or a leaping horse and feel the energy of the hand that drew it thousands of years ago. Perhaps it was a prayer for a successful hunt, perhaps a reminder of an animal that once escaped, perhaps a celebration of life or a warning of death. We will never know, and that is precisely why we can feel the mystery. Such caves are scattered across many parts of the world, from Europe to Asia, even Africa, each with different symbols, yet the same spirit. Some are filled with animal figures, some adorned with handprints, some with abstract lines that cannot be interpreted. It is as if ancient humans everywhere felt the same urge, the urge to leave a trace, the urge to speak to something greater, though in a language we can never fully understand. Imagine the night in that valley, when fog descends and the moon shines upon the cave's mouth. In the distance, the howl of wolves is heard, and a small torch glows inside the cave, casting shadows that move across the stone walls. The shadows dance, following the motions of humans who might be singing, might be praying, might be performing rituals long forgotten. All of this unfolded in a silence filled only with the sounds of nature, the sound of fire, and the sound of human hearts wondering about the vast world. As we stand imagining this scene, we feel the vast distance of time, but also a strange closeness, as if a thin thread connects us with them. For at the core, their curiosity was the same as ours today, only the form of expression was different. In an age that is hard to place within our modern timeline, early humans walked a boundless, wild world. A world not yet divided into nations, kingdoms, or cities with stone walls. Nature ruled completely, and humans were only one among many creatures struggling to survive. There were high mountains whose peaks were always covered in snow, vast grasslands filled with herds of bison, dense forests so dark even in daylight, and great rivers whose rushing waters carried both fertility and danger. There were no maps to guide steps, no compass to point direction. Everything depended on memory, signs of nature, and instincts passed down from generation to generation. We can imagine a small group, perhaps 10 to 20 people, slowly making their way through a misty valley. They carried children, simple tools of stone, bone, and wood, and the hope of finding a safe place to endure. Each step was not just a journey, but also a gamble between life and death. They had to follow the tracks of animals that could become food, while at the same time staying alert to predators lurking among the trees. Night was the most tense time, when darkness covered the forest and only a small campfire offered a sense of safety. Around that fire they sat, sharing simple meals of roasted meat, wild fruit, or boiled roots, while listening to the sounds of the night. Imagine how their hearts beat faster at the sound of a breaking branch in the distance, or the long howl of wolves echoing among the hills. In that fear, they huddled close, feeling the warmth of each other's bodies, as if the bond of family and group was a stronger shield than any weapon. Yet behind the fear, there was also a beauty we can no longer imagine. The night sky then was far clearer than the sky we see today, filled with stars so bright they seemed within reach. Perhaps they pointed out those stars to their children, telling stories never written, about ancestral spirits dwelling in the heavens, or giant beasts chasing the light of the moon. These stories are lost to us, but the echo of their imagination may still live in the ancient symbols they left behind. On cave walls deep in the wilderness, human hands left faint prints, red, black, or white marks pressed against the stone, as if to say, "I was here, do not forget me." That simple symbol, only the shape of a hand, now feels profound, because it crosses thousands of years. We stand before it with an indescribable feeling, as if they are still present, as if time itself is only a thin illusion. In many places, those handprints stand beside animal drawings, showing the deep relationship between humans and the creatures they hunted, ate, and revered. Sometimes we find abstract patterns, zigzag lines, circles, or repeating dots whose meaning is lost forever. Perhaps it was a language, perhaps a prayer, perhaps simply an expression of beauty beyond our grasp. Whatever it was, those symbols are silent witnesses of lives once lived. If we walk deeper into the caves, the darkness thickens. The air grows damp, and our footsteps echo long. At the deepest point, where sunlight never touched, it was there that early humans lit torches and painted. Why they chose such hidden places, far from outside light, we will never know. Perhaps they wished to create sacred spaces, used only at special moments, when rituals or prayers were offered. We can only guess, for no words remain, only images and silence that speak. That silence still lingers if we visit today, a piercing silence, as if the cave walls still hold whispers from the past. Perhaps the ancients heard something within. Perhaps the echoes of dripping water and shifting flames made them feel close to something unseen. For them, the world was not only what could be seen, but also spirits, shadows, and mysterious forces beyond explanation. All of this was woven into their daily lives, into hunting, into sleep, into fear, and into wonder. As we imagine all this, we feel that the distance between past and present is only an illusion. We who live in a modern world of lights, highways, and tall buildings still carry the same curiosity. Still gaze at the stars with the same questions. Still search for meaning in silence. That is why the story of early humans feels near, even though thousands of years separate us. They vanished without written records, but they left something stronger. Traces that speak directly to our hearts. When we imagine the daily activities of early humans walking beneath the vast sky, we are not picturing a peaceful life, but a harsh cycle in which every hour, every second, could determine whether they survived or not. Morning began, not with the sound of a clock, but with the first light of the sun touching leaves wet with dew. At that light, members of the group were usually already preparing. Some adult men moving out from their simple shelters, whether caves or temporary huts made of branches and leaves, to search for tracks of animals. Women and children often stayed near the campfire, still glowing faintly, keeping it alive so it would not die, for fire was not only a tool for cooking, but also a protection against wild beasts. If we observe closely, early humans lived in a pattern that constantly repeated, yet full of variation depending on season, weather, and food availability. In winter, they likely hid more often inside caves, wrapping their bodies in animal hides, storing bones as reserves, and struggling to endure the biting cold. In summer, they moved more often, following herds of animals that also migrated. Nothing was static. Everything moved, as if life itself was an endless journey. Along their journey, we can imagine the crucial role played by simple objects, such as a stone axe carefully shaped to sharpness, or a spear with a bone tip bound with plant fibers. These objects may look simple, but for early humans, they were the difference between life and death. With the spear, they could wound large animals. With the axe, they could cut meat, fell wood, or even defend themselves from sudden attacks. They also relied on smaller objects, like containers made from animal skin to carry water, or rough weavings to store wild fruits. Every object had value. Every object was created with a clear purpose, and often passed down from one generation to the next. Yet, behind those practical daily activities, there was a dark side that could not be avoided. Imagine a child, feverish in the middle of the night, without medicine, without modern treatment, only prayers and hope. Perhaps the mother sat near the child, blowing warm air, touching the forehead with work-worn hands, hoping the heat would ease. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not, and death often came quietly without resistance. There were no grand graves, only shallow pits dug in soil or cave hollows covered with stones. Yet, even in their simplicity, we find traces that early humans treated death with meaning. There are skeletons found lying with small objects, such as ornaments made of animal teeth or stone tools, as if showing they believed in another life after death. This gives us an image that early humans were not only busy surviving, but also trying to understand the meaning of life and death, trying to connect the visible world with the invisible. This fact makes us ask, when did humans begin to imagine spirits and life after death? There is no definite answer, but archaeological traces show that this sense of spirituality existed long before writing appeared. And if we step further into imagination, perhaps on certain nights they gathered in caves, lit fires, and someone began to speak in a low voice, telling stories about ancestors, about magical animals, or about the origins of the stars. Children listened with wide eyes, adults nodded slowly, and among the firelight and the moving shadows on cave walls, those stories came alive. We do not know what they said. No texts remain for us to read, but we can feel it in silence. And that is where the mystery lies, for those lost stories still resonate within our imagination, linking us with those who vanished long ago. If we pause for a moment and imagine the atmosphere of an early human camp in the evening, we might find a scene not too different from the small villages of later times, though far simpler and rougher. The campfire was usually the center of activity, for it was there that food was cooked, stories were told, and bodies sought warmth as the air grew cooler. Children ran in small circles around the fire, playing with stones, bones, or bits of wood as if they were precious toys. Meanwhile, women sat close together, their hands busy cleaning animal hides, pounding roots, or weaving plant fibers into containers. Men who had just returned from the hunt looked tired, but in their eyes there was a glimmer of satisfaction when they brought back prey. Perhaps a young deer or a bird snared with a simple trap. The food was then shared equally, roasted over embers, its aroma filling the air. And in that shared moment, one could sense a form of strong community, not governed by written law, but by instinct to endure together. Yet that peaceful evening could change in an instant into tension, for nature never truly promised safety. Sometimes, from the darkness of the forest, came the growl of wolves or the crack of breaking branches, signs of predators lurking. At that moment, the entire group became alert. Men gripping spears, the fire made bigger to frighten animals, and children drawn closer to the center of the circle. It was not uncommon for them to spend nights keeping watch, taking turns to guard the fire from dying, for the fire's extinction could mean disaster. The life of early humans was always balanced between simple comfort and sudden danger that could come at any moment. From this, we can imagine how deep their fear must have been, a fear that perhaps has been passed down biologically to us. The fear of darkness, the fear of strange sounds in the night. Yet interestingly, in the midst of that fear, there was also an extraordinary form of solidarity. They did not live alone. They lived in groups, and the group was both fortress and home. Without a group, an early human almost certainly would not survive long. Not only because hunting alone was difficult, but also because loneliness was haunting. Loneliness in those times could be as deadly as hunger. A group gave physical protection, but it also gave meaning, a subtle web binding them with stories, oral traditions, and emotional ties. If we go deeper, we might sense that evening in an early human camp was not only about food and fire, but also about building collective memory. Every story told, every simple song sung in flat tones, every little dance around the fire, all were ways of binding themselves to something greater than that single day. And in that process, a sense of history was born, even without written records. We, living thousands of years later, can only guess, can only see the traces of charcoal on cave walls or skeletons buried with beads. But behind all that was a life full of feelings, hopes, and real fears. The darker fact is that not every evening ended with laughter. Some evenings ended in tears when a member of the group never returned from the hunt. Some evenings ended in wounds when animal attacks could not be fully repelled. Some evenings ended in silence due to hunger, when hunting yielded nothing and only bitter roots could be eaten. Yet even so, the wheel of life kept turning and they endured, night after night, with hope that tomorrow would bring a little more sustenance than today. This was the small miracle of early humans, a resilience that has placed us here today. For without their endurance in the darkness of thousands of years ago, we might never have been born. Imagine a morning slowly growing in an open plain thousands of years ago, when mist still hung low above the wild grasses and dew dripped from leaves onto the cold earth. The sound of wild birds echoed faintly, while far beyond the hills, the sun had just begun to lift the horizon. In the midst of this landscape, a small group of early humans rose from their sleep, their bodies shivering but trained to endure the piercing morning air. They slept close together, skin against skin, to share warmth, covered by layers of animal hides. Once the fire died out and was replaced by the light of morning, daily routines began. Some walked to the nearest river, fetching water with containers made of shells or leather pouches. Others checked the traps set the night before, hoping a rabbit or small bird had been caught. Still others combed the meadows for wild fruits or edible roots, though they always had to be wary of poisonous plants that could bring sudden death. These activities looked simple, but within them lay the rhythm of life that had unfolded for thousands of years with little change. The life of early humans was repetition. Day after day, a cycle dictated by seasons, weather, and the availability of food. Yet within that repetition were moments filled with mystery, moments difficult to explain, such as when they suddenly stopped working just to watch the sunrise, or when they sat silently by the riverbank, as if sensing an unspoken connection with the flowing water. Was this the beginning of ritual, or merely an instinctive pause? We do not know, but the moment lingers even in our imagination today. The darker fact was that behind every routine, danger always lurked. A large animal in search of water could come to the same river, turning the simple act of fetching water into a fatal encounter. The poison of a root or mushroom could claim a life within hours. A small cut from sharp stone could fester without medicine, bringing long and slow suffering. Yet strangely, they still rose each morning, still fetched water, still checked traps, still searched for food, as though life itself was the most sacred ritual to be performed. We may see it as simplicity, but it may also have been courage. And among these daily tasks, curiosity was also born. Children often imitated adults, learning from every movement, every object, every sound. They asked without words, only with their gaze, and answers were given through example, not sentences. A stone struck against another, producing sparks, and the child remembered. A bird prepared over the fire, and the child observed how feathers were removed. Knowledge was never formally taught, but planted through repetition and observation. Thus, each morning was not only about survival, but also about transmitting collective memory from one generation to the next. We who live today are but the continuation of that process, the result of thousands of misty mornings, full of uncertainty, but also full of perseverance. If we close our eyes for a moment, we might hear the sound of feet pressing on wet earth, the splash of river water being fetched, the breath of cold air, and within it all, we would realize that the life of early humans was a quiet song that never ceased a rhythm, echoing beneath the ancient sky, marking the long journey toward our existence today. Fire was always at the center of early human life, not only as a source of warmth, but also as light that pushed away darkness and as a symbol of power they could never fully understand. When night arrived, with winds sweeping down from the forest and the roars of beasts echoing from afar, the flames became an invisible shield, guarding them from creeping fear. They sat in a circle, bodies leaning toward the blaze, their faces glowing in the trembling red light that moved with the restless fire. Over the embers, animal flesh roasted slowly. The smell of fat dripping and burning mingled with the crack of wood splitting in the heat. Children sat with wide eyes, watching the occasional sparks leap upward as if stars had fallen from the sky. Fire was not just a survival tool, it was a window into something greater. On the cave walls, their shadows danced, stretching, shrinking, spinning. And within those movements, stories seemed to take shape. Perhaps this was the beginning of myth, born from shadows resembling animals, spirits, or entities beyond comprehension. Some of them might have pointed at particular shapes, linking them with a successful hunt or with threats that must be remembered. There were no elaborate words to explain any of this, only short sounds, breaths, or gestures, but their meanings ran deep, woven with awe and fear. The fact often overlooked is that fire was not always under their control. Sometimes heavy rain would extinguish it, leaving them in total darkness, shivering, waiting for dawn. Sometimes fire injured them, burning skin, leaving scars to be remembered for life. Even in watchfulness, there was always uncertainty whether the fire would last until morning or vanish at the moment it was most needed. Yet within that uncertainty lay their calm acceptance, their way of living with fragility while relying on it as vital. The cave bore witness to it all. Within its stone walls, the sound of fire echoed more deeply. Shadows grew sharper, and the air stayed warmer. On the walls, we still find traces of soot, clinging for thousands of years, silent testimony to flames that once flickered and died again and again. Some simple drawings have been discovered in caves, shapes of hunted animals, repeated lines, and symbols whose meanings are lost. Perhaps they were ritual, perhaps mere expression, or perhaps signs left for the generations to come. We can only guess. As night grew deeper, some of them fell asleep by the fire, while one or two remained awake, tending the embers, ensuring no beast came too near, ensuring the group remained safe. The nights of early humans always rested between calm and threat, between warmth and cold, between light and darkness. If we imagine it quietly, we might still sense that silence, broken only by the crack of wood, the slow breaths of sleeping bodies, and sometimes the scream of a night bird echoing from the far forest. Together, they formed a rhythm, a simple, ancient harmony, yet captivating still, even today as we try to understand it once more. For early humans, sleep was not a luxury, but a necessity that came amidst constant unease and lurking dangers. As the fire crackled with its small, rhythmic sounds, some allowed their bodies to rest upon animal hides laid as bedding, while others remained half awake, guarding the fragile circle of their lives. In the darkness, lit only by flames, sleep came not with long and pleasant dreams, but with fragments of shadows that blurred the line between reality and illusion. Perhaps some woke suddenly at the howl of a wolf in the distance, only to return to slumber once reassured that their group was intact and the fire still burned. Imagine that silence where human breath mingled with the breath of the earth, where cold air entered lungs heavily, where the constant song of crickets or night insects became the natural background. Their bodies may have been weary after a day of hunting or gathering roots. Yet in those short stretches of sleep, they found a kind of calm that cannot be explained. Archaeologists suggest that the sleeping patterns of early humans were likely different from ours today. Their nights were broken into segments, waking several times and then returning to rest in cycles that followed the rhythm of nature. When the full moon cast its piercing light into the cave, their sleep may have been shorter, interrupted by shadows that stretched and shifted across the stone walls, stirring both wonder and fear. Yet when heavy rains poured down, the steady dripping from the cave's mouth became a lullaby that drew them into deeper rest. It is fascinating to imagine that dreams may have existed then, though we can never know what they saw. Perhaps they dreamed of failed hunts, of towering beasts, or of ancestors who had passed, appearing as hazy figures guiding or warning them. Dreams could have been messages, resurfacing fears, or perhaps nothing more than the fire's flickering echo within the mind. In that sleep, their wounds healed, their strained muscles restored, while children grew silently, drawing strength from a night filled with mystery. There were no soft pillows, no thick blankets, only bodies pressed together, sharing warmth, and the assurance that they were not alone. If one awoke from the cold, they may have reached for an arm or shoulder nearby, seeking reassurance before slipping back into light sleep. Nights in caves were not merely times of rest, but spaces full of possibility, where consciousness blended between the real world and the world of shadows. If we sit quietly and imagine ourselves there, we might feel our heartbeat, slow our breath, lengthen our eyes, grow heavy, and we too might drift into that ancient current of sleep, simple yet profound, just as they once did thousands of years ago. When morning arrived in the prehistoric world, the sunlight did not immediately greet them warmly as we know it today, but crept in slowly, filtering through the gaps of trees or reflecting gently at the mouth of the cave. Those who had slept pressed close through the night began to stir, opening eyes heavy from slumber that was never truly deep. The fire that had burned since evening had dimmed, leaving only faint glowing embers, still red enough to ward off the lingering chill. Usually, one or two individuals took responsibility to ensure the flames did not completely die, for fire was not just warmth or light, but the very symbol of survival. Without it, they lost not only the means to cook or keep warm, but also their shield against prowling beasts. Thus, upon waking, the first task was to coax the embers back into flame, feeding them with dry twigs, watching thin smoke curl into the pale morning air. Once the fire flared again, they gathered around it in silence, a quiet ritual marking the beginning of the day. There were no greetings, no lengthy words, only exchanged glances that acknowledged they had passed through the night unharmed. The morning itself was quiet, filled only with the calls of birds or the rustling of dew-soaked leaves brushed by the breeze. As they sat, some reached for sharpened stones or carved bones, checking their tools, repairing what had broken, resharpening what had dulled. The children woke later, often still curled beside their mothers, peering with sleepy curiosity at the flames. They did not yet understand the full weight of keeping fire alive, of hunting, or of fearing the night, but they learned slowly in every gesture the adults made. Breakfast was not a warm meal laid neatly, but scraps of meat left from the previous hunt or bitter roots chewed raw. Occasionally, they were lucky enough to find fallen fruit, a rare, sweet gift. All of this was done in quiet, unhurried, for time in those days was not divided by hours or schedules, but by nature's signals through the sun, moon, and stars. As the light grew stronger, small groups prepared their paths. Some went to the river to fetch water, some readied spears for the hunt, while others remained to watch over the children and the cave they called home. There was no rigid division of labor, only instinct. Those who were strong would hunt. Those who were ailing stayed behind. The prehistoric morning was fragile, yet full of possibility. A time when humans looked upon a new day with the simplest of hopes to survive until the sun once more descended. If we close our eyes to imagine it, we might feel the cool dew clinging to our skin. Smell the damp earth mingled with the faint smoke of rekindled embers. Hear birdsong echo in the fresh air. And sense that the day had begun, not in noise, but in the slow rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the earth itself. As the sunlight crept further and slowly chased away the thin mist clinging around the cave's mouth, the small band of prehistoric humans prepared to step out from their refuge. There was no shouted command, no leader giving loud instructions, but rather a quiet understanding expressed in gestures and glances. Those holding spears walked ahead, their steps careful along a faint path pressed into the earth by repeated journeys. Behind them, women carried baskets woven from plant fibers used to gather roots, fruits, or seeds. The children followed clumsily, sometimes tripping over roots or stones, yet determined to come along, driven by curiosity stronger than fear. The silence was broken only by the snap of a twig beneath a foot or a soft whisper exchanged when they spotted tracks pressed into dew-softened ground. The cave that had felt warm and protective was now left behind. And beyond it stretched a world vast, filled with possibilities and unseen threats. Their steps seemed guided by patterns inherited from generations before. For there were no written records, no maps, only collective memory passed on through stories and repeated habits. Each time they left the cave, their eyes scanned for subtle signs, like the odd rustle of leaves that might betray an animal, or certain calls of birds hinting at danger. Their bodies moved with watchfulness, but not with excessive fear, for such living had become natural to them. As they ventured farther, the scent of damp earth mingled with fresh leaves, the cool morning air clinging to their skin. Now and then, shafts of sunlight broke through the trees, casting long, moving shadows as they walked. From a distance came the sound of running water, a stream glinting with morning light. The river was their first destination, not only for drinking water, but because life gathered there. From small fish to the animals that came to drink. Yet the river also carried danger. 4 large predators often lurked nearby. They approached with caution, spreading out like a herd, some crouching low to ensure no threat lay hidden. The women began searching for shellfish or snails at the water's edge, their hands deft though never formally taught. Children picked up curious stones or bits of driftwood, as though these simple objects were toys. Meanwhile, the hunters studied tracks in the mud, searching for signs of deer or wild boar that might be hunted. All was done with patience, for haste only invited mistakes that could be fatal. Beneath the calm lay a faint tension, as though the morning air itself held secrets. If we imagine ourselves there, we might sense the slow rhythm of their steps, hear a heartbeat racing against the sounds of nature, feel the damp chill clinging to the skin, and realize that leaving the cave was not merely about finding food, but facing a vast world full of mysteries. They walked without maps, without certain direction, guided only by instinct and inherited knowledge. And each step upon the earth was an act of simple courage, the courage to live in a world that never promised safety. At the riverbank, they paused, letting their bodies rest from the long walk just completed. The water was clear, flowing gently at the shallows, but deeper toward the middle, the current grew stronger, glinting in the morning sun. Its surface reflected the trees along the banks, adding depth to the scene, making the river not only a source of water, but a kind of mirror that held secrets. Some bent down, cupped the water in their hands, and drank slowly, feeling its chill soothe and cut down their throats. The women lowered their baskets, crouching by the edge, prying mussels from stones or small snails from the mud. They worked in silence, as though knowing that quiet was more valuable than speech. The children, restless with curiosity, splashed toward shallow pools, trying to catch small fish with their hands, laughing silently when their fingers brushed only the cold surface. They did not realize that such play could draw the attention of hidden predators. Across the river, a thicket stirred gently, as though something watched. Yet the eyes of these early hunters were sharp, and one raised his hand in signal. All froze instantly. Only the sound of water remained, as if the world itself held its breath. No one knew if it was just the wind or some large animal. Such tension was woven into their daily lives, living always at the edge between need and risk. After some moments, the thicket grew still again, and they resumed their tasks. The hunters stirred the mud with their spears, hoping to flush out hidden fish, while others worked with a crude net woven from plant fibers. All was done with patience, for haste at the river could mean death as well as life. Suddenly, a white heron landed on a stone in midstream, its feathers glowing like pale fire. It stood erect, watching the surface, then struck swiftly, raising a gleaming fish in its beak before swallowing it. The humans watched in silent awe, perhaps with envy, seeing how easily the bird seized what they struggled to gain. In silence, they learned, imitating the gestures of animals, absorbing knowledge without need of explanation. To them, the world was full of teachers, not only fellow humans, but birds, insects, even the current itself. Yet beneath the calm, subtle signs could shift everything. A crocodile might emerge at any time, its body sliding like a shadow, soundless. The threat of such predators always haunted the river's edge. Perhaps not today, but caution could never be abandoned. That was why hunters still stood with spears ready, their eyes fixed on the quiet water, knowing that quiet never truly meant safe. And in that faint tension, the river bore witness to humanity's fragile bond with nature, a bond made of caution, dependence, and silence. After a long while by the river, they began to spread out slowly, like a procession of shadows moving by instinct. Some of the men walked along the water's edge, gripping their spears tightly, their eyes scanning for signs of large fish trapped in deeper pools. They knew the river held not only drinking water, but flesh that could give them strength. Each step was measured, for the mud beneath could deceive, sometimes firm, sometimes suddenly deep enough to swallow their feet. Meanwhile, another group searched the nearby forest edge, seeking wild fruits, edible leaves, or roots hidden beneath damp soil. Women's hands traced the ground, pulling up tubers from beneath, every small find becoming a vital piece in their fragile existence. The children stayed close to a makeshift fire, tending to the small flame with dry twigs to keep it alive, though the fire offered only thin smoke and faint heat. They understood fire was both guardian and signal. A guardian because it could repel beasts, a signal because it could attract danger from afar. That dilemma haunted them always, whether fire meant safety or risk. None could be sure. From the distance came the sound of a twig, snapping, not loud, but enough to turn every head. The hunters crouched low, their hearts quickening, though their faces remained still, betraying nothing. They waited, listening only to breath mingled with the murmur of the stream. From behind the thicket, a deer emerged, slender-bodied, eyes wide with caution. It stepped toward the river, sniffed the air, then lowered its head to drink. For the hunters, it was both opportunity and trial of patience. To move too soon would send the deer bounding into the forest, leaving behind only faint tracks. They held back, letting it feel safe. Then when the distance was right, one spear was hurled with all its strength. The weapon cut through the air, pierced the animal with a heavy sound, and the deer staggered, bolting briefly before collapsing by the water's edge. There was no cheer, no outburst of joy, only silence, as if they knew the life just taken was part of a greater circle. Some moved close, ensuring the animal no longer stirred, then carefully began cutting into its flesh. Blood seeped into the earth, mixing with the mud, carried away in small rivulets into the river, vanishing. Meanwhile, women returned from the forest with baskets of dark wild fruits. Their taste perhaps sour, perhaps sweet, none knew until tested. All was gathered by the fire, now growing with added wood. The scent of roasting meat rose slowly, mingling with the smell of damp earth and leaves. They sat in a circle, eating in silence, only the sounds of chewing, boiling water in a stone container, and sometimes the distant calls of night birds. Yet beneath it all lingered an unease. They believed that whenever they hunted, whenever they carved flesh, something was watching. Whether the spirits of ancestors or beasts drawn by blood, they were never truly alone. That was why they ate quietly, with no loud laughter, no long tales. Everything followed a slow rhythm, as though each bite might be the last if the night carried something they could not resist. In that silence, the fire flickered gently, lighting tired faces, their shadows dancing upon river stones, like an ancient story retold endlessly without end. Night descended slowly, not suddenly, but like a dark curtain being drawn little by little, turning the sky from pale blue to ashen gray and finally into a colorless black. The voices of daytime birds faded one by one, replaced by the endless drone of night insects, as though providing an eternal background music for life below. The fire they had built was now the center of their attention, its small orange glow reflecting on the river's surface, creating trembling lines of light that danced with the current. All sat close around the fire, their bodies pressed together not only for warmth, but for safety. Their faces glowed in shifting tones, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, like secrets surfacing and disappearing upon stone. Above them, the moon slowly revealed itself through a thin veil of clouds, pale and round like an unblinking eye. Each glance upward brought a calm yet uneasy feeling, as if the moon was not merely an object in the sky, but a presence holding its gaze. Children had begun to drift into sleep, their heads resting on their mother's arms, small hands still clutching stones or twigs from their earlier play. The adults remained awake, their eyes heavy but unwilling to surrender, for they knew the night was a time when the world changed. What was safe by day could become threat in the dark. The forest by the river was no longer just trees, but a black wall hiding unknown shapes. Each sound, a falling leaf or a snapping branch, could be mere chance or a sign of something they would not wish to see. The river's voice, once soothing, now seemed deeper, heavier, echoing in ways not entirely its own. At times, the current carried twigs or leaves that spun in the fire's light before vanishing into the dark. They watched in silence, as though each drifting piece bore an unreadable message. Some fed more wood into the fire, keeping the flames alive, though they knew the light might also be seen from afar. There were murmurs among them, not long conversations, only short words that felt more like prayers or reminders. None could sleep soundly, even when exhaustion pressed their eyes closed. The hunter's gaze often turned toward the forest, searching for the faint glint of animal eyes, movements within the brush. They knew the scent of deer's blood drying by the river might summon predators, saber-tooths, wolves, or something with no name in their tongue. This was why they did not leave meat scattered, instead hanging it above the fire so its scent mingled with smoke. Yet still, the feeling of being watched never left them. Across the river, shadows sometimes shifted, not by the wind, but like figures standing, moving slowly, too distant to see clearly, too near to dismiss. They did not try to know for certain, for no answer would bring peace. In that silence, the moon climbed higher, its pale light covering forest and river, thickening every shadow. The fire, once warm, now felt small, as though insufficient to resist the vastness of the night. People sat closer still, eyes half shut, half open, keeping watch in turns. In such moments, time no longer moved as it should. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into nights without end. None could know what waited in the dark, and perhaps none needed to. For in their world, mystery was not something to solve, but something to accept as part of living. In the middle of the night, when the air grew heavier and dew began to drip from the broad leaves hanging at the forest's edge, those still awake gathered closer to the fire. The flames crackled softly. The damp wood from that afternoon's rain, releasing thin smoke that rose and dissolved into the pale moonlight. No long words were spoken, only simple gestures of hands, slow breaths and glances that met briefly before turning away. It was as if they knew this was not a time for words, but a time for silence that carried its own sound. An old woman rose from where she sat, her body bent but her eyes still bright. She approached the fire and scattered a handful of dried seeds into it. Small popping sounds followed, the seeds burning quickly, leaving behind a faint aroma different from wood. The people bowed slightly, honoring this simple act. No language was uttered, yet their attention showed that they regarded it as more than habit. There was meaning, hope, perhaps even fear that they sought to tame through that small gesture. Some raised their hands toward the moon. It's not high, only to chest or shoulder level, as if offering something unseen. The children, half asleep, imitated without knowing why, their small hands trembling from cold, yet still lifted. The night wind carried a faint sound, not a song, but a low murmur repeated. A tone so soft it was nearly swallowed by the insects. It rose and fell, almost disappearing. Yet together, it created a current of sound as though born from the earth itself. The fire, once ordinary, now seemed different. Its orange glow swayed as if moving with the rhythm of their voices. Shadows on stone walls and tree trunks danced slowly, shifting into unrecognizable forms. Some like animals, some like faces, others just curving lines with no order. They stared long, as though the shadows were not merely reflections, but messages from something greater. None attempted to interpret clearly, for they knew interpretations fracture, while silence leaves space for all possibilities. The old woman then sat again, her eyes still fixed calmly on the fire. Another rose, a young man carrying a bundle of feathers at his waist. He placed them near the flames, not to burn, only to rest upon stone. The feathers quivered in the hot wind, their faded colors still showing they once belonged to a great bird, perhaps an eagle, perhaps a creature now rare. All eyes turned to the feathers, and the murmur softened further, like breath being held. The ritual had no fixed form, no written rule, no memorized sequence. It flowed like water shaping itself to the land. At times seeds, at times feathers, at times long silence without movement. Yet behind this uncertainty lay the same thread, the human desire to join with something beyond themselves. They named nothing, carved no symbol, only repeated gestures born of fear and awe. That night, with the moon as witness, they placed all their hope in the crackling fire and in the darkness that they could never fully understand. After the final murmurs faded, only the crackle of fire remained. The night wind crept through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. One by one, the bodies that had sat upright now slowly reclined, wrapped in hides of animals. The children were the first to fall asleep, their breathing steady, occasionally letting out small sounds like complaints in their dreams. Adults followed, though some remained close to the fire, as if fearing its flames might die. The silence that settled was not emptiness, but a vast space filled only with breathing, insects, and the crack of burning wood. Their sleep was not silent. Behind their closed eyelids, shadows appeared. Dreams came, blending memories, hopes, and something unexplainable. A young man dreamed he walked alone through a wide plain, tall grasses covering his face. And in the distance, he saw a large black figure moving swiftly before vanishing. He could not tell whether it was beast or man, only that his body trembled until he woke briefly, looked around, then drifted back into sleep. A woman dreamed differently. In her sleep, she found herself inside a cave, the same cave where they sheltered that night. But the cave walls glowed, not from fire, but from red lines pulsing as if blood flowed within. She heard faint voices, not in any tongue she knew, but their tone was like a prayer without end. When she awoke, her body was sweating despite the cold air, and she only clutched the animal hide around her more tightly. The dreams seemed a continuation of the ritual they had just performed. As though a door had been opened by the fire, and it did not close even when their eyes shut. Some murmured in their sleep, voices echoing the same low chant they had spoken earlier. A child cried briefly, then stilled again, while his father touched his head gently, without fully waking. Reality and dream no longer seemed apart, merging under the pale moon sliding westward. The fire still burned, though wood had dwindled. Red embers glowed like eyes, watching, and sparks leaped into the air only to vanish before touching earth. From afar came the howl of wolves, not near, but enough to remind that the forest was always alive. Yet to those asleep, the sound entered their dreams, changing into faint calls, or into endless songs drifting in the dark. No one could tell where reality ended and shadow began. That night, around the small fire almost dying, those ancient people slept with fragile bodies, but minds that wandered far. They did not know their dreams might one day be called myths, that the shadows they saw would be retold as spirits, as gods, or as ancestors watching. For them, it was only sleep, only respite from the cold, only a small space for rest. Yet within that simplicity, there was something deeper, something they could never fully grasp, just as we now can only guess without ever knowing the answer. Morning arrived slowly, as though hesitant to touch the land still cloaked in the night's cold. Thick fog clung between the trees, hiding distance and making every step feel as if they walked through a world not meant for humans. The fire that had burned bright the night before was now only dim embers. Much of the wood reduced to soft ash, crumbling at the slightest touch. The smell of smoke lingered on their skin and hair, marking the long night they had just endured. One by one, bodies stirred, rising from heavy sleep. Rubbing their eyes, breathing deeply, and staring blankly as though still caught in dreams. The first sound was a child's cry from the cold, followed by the mother's murmurs as she wrapped the hide tighter around the little one. Some adults quickly stood, gathering small branches to rekindle the nearly dead fire. To them, fire was not merely light or warmth, but the sign that they were still bound to life. Without it, the forest was an unpredictable threat. With it, there was at least a fragile boundary separating them from darkness. While waiting for the fire to grow again, others looked upward, watching the still gray sky. The sun had yet to appear, but its light pressed down on the fog, spreading a pale glow across the clearing. In the distance, the first bird's call rang out, a long note as if announcing that night had ended. Yet for those ancient people, the end of night was more than a routine. It was the decision of whether the day could be lived safely. They began to prepare slowly. Some women tied up the animal hides that had served as bedding, while men checked their stone tools. One patiently sharpened a spear tip, scraping it against a large stone with a rasping sound that repeated again and again. Children, refreshed, ran through the thin fog, their light steps echoing strangely in the damp air, laughter bouncing back like distant echoes. Yet, beneath the bustle of morning lay a feeling hard to name. They still remembered the dreams of the night, dreams that felt more real than waking life. Some exchanged glances, saying nothing, only sharing a look that admitted they had seen the same things. One quietly told of a shadow crossing his dream. Another answered that she too had seen glowing red walls within the cave. These stories weighed on the morning, as though the fog was not only vapor, but also a veil holding back something they should not try to understand. Amid the mist, one elder stood still for a long while. He gazed westward, toward a faint path between the trees. It was unclear whether he truly saw something or was following instinct alone. His hand touched his chest. Then he turned back, returning to the circle of fire, sitting and closing his eyes for a moment. His face seemed calm, yet the lines on his brow hinted that something troubled his mind. Perhaps he read the signs of the morning in ways only known to those carrying the burden of generations. When the fire revived, glowing embers gave warmth and light anew. Thin smoke rose, merging with the fog, creating strange shapes in the air. To tired eyes, the smoke looked like vague figures, walking slowly before fading away. Children pointed and laughed, but the adults remained silent, watching intently, as though realizing those shapes might not be mere tricks of light. That morning felt unusual, caught between real and unreal, between ordinary and extraordinary, as if the world waited for them to make a choice that would shape the day ahead. At last, they decided to move, leaving behind the circle of fire that slowly died away. The morning fog was still heavy, cloaking the path so that the world seemed to consist of only a few steps ahead. No direction was truly clear, only instinct guided by the experience of elders who knew the faint trails between trees. Their bodies moved together. Children kept at the center, women carrying bundles of hides filled with tools and scraps of food, while the men guarded the front and rear, gripping stone-tipped spears tightly. The sound of footsteps pressing into damp earth echoed rhythmically, sometimes accompanied by the snap of a branch or the scurry of small creatures fleeing. The forest in the morning felt different. The fog made the trees appear taller and stranger, their trunks rising endlessly, like giant pillars holding up a gray sky. Dew dripped from leaves, falling slowly to the ground and forming tiny pools. Now and then, a distant bird call rang out, though the fog distorted its direction, leaving them uncertain if it was near or far. Children walking in the middle sometimes glanced to the sides, their eyes widening as if every shadow in the mist could become something unexpected. Yet the firm grip of their parents' hands gave them a fragile sense of safety, as fragile as dying embers. At a clearing, they stopped briefly. The elder who had stared westward earlier stepped to the front again, studying the nearly invisible trail. He crouched, touching the earth with his fingertips, then inhaled deeply as if reading signs in the scent and dampness of the air. After a long pause, he nodded, signaling for them to move on. No words were spoken, only gestures of head, hands, and bodies forming the language of their daily life. The journey resumed, this time slower. The fog thickened in places, forcing them to walk with utmost caution. Every tree trunk looked the same, making the world feel as if it spun without direction. Some adults began marking the path with broken branches or shallow scratches on bark so they could find their way back if lost. Yet even with those signs, there lingered a fear that the fog could swallow all traces, erasing memory of the way they had come. Sounds within the forest often made them pause. A rustle of leaves from an unseen source, or the crack of a branch that seemed to come from something large. The men at the front immediately raised their spears, eyes fixed in the direction of the noise. Children were pulled tighter into the center, and for a moment silence hung over them all. Then the sound faded, replaced by a stillness deeper than before. They moved on again, stepped slower, understanding that the forest was not a place easily comprehended. Amid the march, there were tender moments. One small child, weary, was carried by his father, head resting on his shoulder, eyes half closed as if asleep during the long walk. A woman gave a strip of dried meat to another child, her faint smile a reminder that even in danger, kindness endured. The fire of the night had gone out, but its warmth lingered within them in small gestures of care that made the harsh journey slightly lighter. Yet beneath their steady steps was the sense that they were not walking alone. From within the mist, there sometimes seemed to be eyes following. Shadows moving parallel, or fleeting silhouettes that vanished as the fog shifted. None dared speak of it, yet almost all sensed it. Perhaps it was only wild animals, perhaps only illusions of weary eyes, or perhaps something else, something known only from old stories whispered across generations. In silence, they accepted that presence, walking closer together, letting the fog close the distance between themselves and a world they could not explain. The fog grew thicker, as if the forest sealed itself from the outside world. The trees loomed without clear shape, only gray silhouettes standing still in every direction. Their breath came out in white clouds that merged immediately with the damp air, creating the illusion that they were walking inside a dream with no end. Each step sounded heavier, not just from weary bodies, but also from the weight of uncertainty pressing on their minds. No sun could be seen, no shadows to guide them. The world shrank to a narrow path a few meters ahead, the rest swallowed by endless curtains of mist. The elders stopped repeatedly, trying to read signs on the ground. Yet even their own footprints were hard to see beneath layers of dew and slick moss. Wet branches dripped water onto their shoulders, adding to the cold that pierced their skin. The children began to shiver, some whimpering softly, but their voices were quickly hushed by the firm hands of parents. They knew too much noise could attract attention, whether of wild beasts or of something less explainable. When the journey felt most aimless, they stumbled upon a strange opening in the forest. The fog thinned there, as if wind touched only that single spot. The clearing was small, just enough to hold the group, and at its center stood something that made them stop. A great stone rose from the ground, unlike any others nearby. Its surface was smooth, as though carved deliberately. And in its middle was a circular hollow, like a shallow bowl, always filled with water despite the absence of rain. They approached cautiously. The man leading the line bent down, touched the stone with his fingers, then withdrew quickly, as if its surface was colder than expected. Several exchanged looks, their faces caught between curiosity and fear. Someone whispered faintly, recalling stories from their ancestors about stones where spirits resided, stones never to be touched carelessly. Yet at the same time, there was a sense they had found something significant, a marker that might guide their wandering. The water in the hollow gleamed with a strange dim light. No sunlight pierced the fog, yet the surface shimmered as if the glow came from within. The children leaned closer, their eyes shining, though their parents pulled them back. No one knew if the light was good or ill, only that it was real and held them all in its grip. At last, one elder stepped forward. His body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the burden of choice. He stared long at the stone, then bent down and drank a sip from the hollow. Silence fell, everyone holding their breath. Seconds passed, and nothing happened. The elder turned to his people, his eyes wet, but his face calm. He nodded slightly, as if to say the water was safe. Slowly, others followed, sipping drop by drop, though fear still flickered across their features. But then the fog around them began to stir strangely. A subtle whirl encircled the stone, moving the air without clear direction. A faint sound arose, not from human mouths, but from somewhere distant, whether real or imagined, no one could say. It was like a long exhale, rhythmic, almost like a song without words. None dared speak, none tried to explain. They only stood, watching the stone, letting awe and fear entwine within their bodies. Perhaps it was only natural phenomenon, perhaps just illusions born of fatigue. But there was another possibility, harder to dismiss that. They were standing at a place long regarded as sacred, where the world of humans brushed against another. And before that stone, in the mist-filled forest, they realized their journey was not merely about moving from one place to another. Something larger awaited them, something they could not fully understand, but which had been waiting all along. After their encounter with the strange stone, the fog, once so heavy, began to move differently. No longer just hanging still, it shifted slowly, opening a faint path ahead, as if inviting the group to step further. Some gazed with relief, as though nature itself had granted a sign that their journey could continue. Yet others felt unease, for the path seemed too neat, too convenient, as if shaped deliberately by something unseen. Their next steps felt like obedience to an invisible guide. The forest, earlier choked with branches and thickets, now appeared strangely clear, as if giant hands had swept the way before them. The fog receded only along that narrow trail, while on either side darkness thickened, refusing their gaze beyond its bounds. Some children tried to glance sideways, but all they saw was a wall of mist, impenetrable and complete. The journey was silent to silent, so that even footsteps rang loudly. Birds of the forest, usually abundant, were gone. No insects, no rustling leaves, only a thin wind circling with them. The people began to feel that this path was not nature's chance, but an invitation, yet from whom no one dared to guess. The elder who had drunk from the stone walked at the front, his eyes often lifting toward the sky still veiled in fog. His face was unreadable, caught between confidence and dread. He spoke little, raising his hand only when he wanted the group to pause. Everyone obeyed, knowing that words themselves might shatter the fragile balance of the moment. They walked in silence, letting the path guide them, though their hearts swirled with questions. Some began to whisper, recalling tales passed down from ancestors. Stories of forest spirits guiding the lost toward their final rest, or of hidden trails appearing only to the worthy. But none could say if they were walking toward salvation or into a trap. The weight of those old stories prickled their skin, though their bodies pressed forward still. Along the trail, they found the remains of a small campfire, long extinguished. Blackened stones circled damp ash, proof that once humans had rested there. Yet who and when, no one knew. The ashes were too old to hold embers, yet clear enough to mark a presence. Some felt relief knowing they were not the first to walk this way, while others grew more anxious, realizing that whoever had lit the fire never returned to tell the tale. As they left the cold fire behind, the air grew stranger still. The fog not only opened ahead, but sealed itself behind, swallowing the way they had just taken. Each time they turned back, the trail was gone, as though no clearing had ever existed. The sense of entrapment deepened, as if the only choice was forward, with no path to return. Night crept in, though in truth the sun had never been seen that day. Darkness bled through the folds of mist, sharpening the tension in their steps. The flames of their torches lit only a handful of steps ahead. Beyond that circle of light, shadows stirred, whether by wind or by something that followed at a distance. No one spoke of it, for to name it aloud was to give their fear greater form. And in such silence, they all knew the forest was never truly empty. Something had followed them, never showing itself, never leaving. And within the fog that carved this strange path, the greatest question of all grew heavier in their minds. Was this road truly leading them to a place they could call home? Or was it carrying them toward something darker than they had ever imagined? The journey carried them deeper into an unfamiliar path. The fog, which had once only shifted to reveal the way, now began to release sound, subtle at first, like the sigh of wind carrying whispers. At first, they thought it was nothing more than leaves brushing or branches bending under the air. But slowly they realized the rhythm was too deliberate to be chance. It was a stretched tone, twisted by air, faintly resembling a song without words. They walked more cautiously, for the sound seemed to come from every direction. Sometimes from ahead, sometimes behind, then suddenly near someone's ear, startling them. A few covered their ears with their hands, hoping to drive it away. But the sound only grew clearer inside their minds, as though it traveled not through air, but through thought itself. There were no words to grasp, only long, resonant tones, like prayers meant for no one. A child whispered that someone had called their name from within the mist. Their parent quickly pulled them close, covering the child's ears, afraid the sound might lure them away. Yet even with ears shut, the child's eyes stared into the fog as though something waited there. Parents tightened their hold on their children, knowing such voices could easily snare fragile hearts. Among them, some tried to calm themselves, suggesting it was only their own voices, multiplied by mist and damp air. But the longer it lasted, the clearer it became that this was no echo. It deepened into a chorus, as if many voices sang at once. At times a whisper, at times a low rumble, at times a scream from deep within the earth. All blended into a strange melody that defied a single source. The elder who had drunk from the stone halted, closing his eyes. His lips moved slowly, in prayer or in thought. At last, in a rough voice, he said the forest was speaking. His words startled some, but none dared deny them. For deep within, they all felt the same. The sound was not chance, not wind. It was meant for them. When they walked again, the sound changed. It grew closer, as if something within the mist walked alongside them, matching their pace. Some swore they heard another breath among their own, heavy and deep. But when they stopped to listen, nothing was there. Only the fog, dense and unyielding. Night grew darker, their torches dying down, leaving only faint, trembling light. In that glow, their faces were pale, their eyes full of fear, but none dared to speak of surrender. To stop meant giving themselves to the dark. To continue meant stepping further into the unknown. They chose to go on, even as each step carried them closer to the unending sound. Then suddenly, the sound sharpened. From the mist came what seemed like singing a woman's voice, long and soft, but threaded with another, heavier voice beneath it, an echoing presence. The song was beautiful, but not comforting. It was a beauty, cold and binding, like a summons impossible to resist. Some closed their eyes, hoping to shut it out, but the more they resisted, the deeper the melody sank into their thoughts. When they finally stopped to rest, the atmosphere thickened. None dared speak aloud, only whispers that vanished into fog. The singing continued, never truly distant. The people began to understand that they were not merely walking a hidden path, they were being watched, perhaps even tested by something they could not name. And in the silence of that night, one truth hung unspoken. The path before them was not only a way forward, but an invitation into a mystery that might never allow them to return. The deepening night made their steps heavy, yet the fog refused to let them turn back. The song that still echoed in their ears was now joined by something new, a dim light glowing far within the mist. First, it appeared no more than a faint spark, flickering like the reflection of their dying torches. But the longer they walked, the more stable it became, shining against the fog-like moonlight trapped in air. None knew its origin, but every eye was drawn to it. As they drew closer, the light was no longer single. It seemed to split into smaller flares, flickering as though breathing. Sometimes dimming, sometimes brightening again. in rhythm with a song still carried through the air. Whispers spread. Some said it was fatigue playing tricks. Others swore it was a sign from the spirit of the forest leading them on. Whatever the truth, the light pushed them forward. Their fear now mingled with a fragile hope. Yet with the light came unease. For though beautiful, it carried a chill, as though it did not come from something living, but from something long dead. Some glanced aside, wondering if they were being led to a ravine or swamp. But the fog sealed every side, leaving only a single straight path toward the glow. The way itself seemed to command them to walk, leaving no choice but forward. Someone whispered that they saw a shadow move near the light. At first, only a faint silhouette, tall, thin, standing still in the fog. Then, when the torch shifted, it vanished, swallowed by dark. Those who heard pulled close together, unwilling to let anyone stray alone. They knew illusions in such woods could kill faster than beasts. Yet curiosity held sway. The more they tried to avoid the light, the stronger the pull to approach. The song, once distant, now wove itself with the glow. Tones rising and falling seemed to breathe with each flicker, forming a strange harmony. It was not only seen by the eyes, but heard by the ears. An elder murmured that light and sound might not be separate at all, but one being an ancient presence inhabiting the fog since the dawn of time. His words frightened some, but deepened the sense that they were witnessing what few ever could. As they neared, the glow began to reveal its source. A wall of stone rose ahead, its surface slick and wet, reflecting pale light. From a crack between the rocks, something glowed from within, as though the stone itself bled radiance. They stood transfixed, staring at the fissure, while the song grew louder, though still without words. Silence fell, broken only by their careful steps and heavy breaths filled with awe and dread. None knew if the light would lead to salvation or to an abyss of mystery. But by then, choice was no longer theirs. The fog closed behind, leaving only one destination. Slowly, one by one, they stepped closer, like moths to flame. And when only a few paces remained, the song shifted. No longer mere tones, it grew clearer, though still strange, as if a mouth behind the glow sang directly to them, delivering a message they could not ignore, though none could understand its meaning. As they drew nearer, the glow from the fissure revealed secrets carved into the stone wall. At first, they seemed like ordinary cracks, born of time. But the longer they stared, the more they became distinct symbols, spirals, intersecting lines forming patterns that never seemed complete. The carvings appeared to move, though stone should not. Each flicker of light made them pulse, as if breathing in rhythm with the song now clearer in their ears. One dared to touch the stone, and a stabbing cold pierced his hand, forcing him to pull away. Strangely, the carving he touched darkened, as if burned by fresh charcoal. The others stood silent, unsure if it was a warning or a response. Yet it was undeniable. The carvings were not mere decoration. They were something more, perhaps a record or an ancient prayer left by beings long vanished. The symbols, on closer look, resembled eyes. Circles within circles, repeated dots like unblinking stares. Some grew uneasy, for the walls seemed to gaze back at them, alive and watchful. The longer they stared, the stronger it felt. Not merely a wall, but a vast face, silent yet aware. The song swelled, no longer distant, but clear. It sounded like many mouths singing at once, though without words. The tones rose and fell, filling the air with a resonance that made their chests vibrate. Children covered their ears, yet still felt it in their bones, as if the sound was not from outside, but born inside them. Whispers spread. Some claimed it was a summons. Others insisted it was a warning to turn away. The elder at the front did not move, his eyes locked on the carvings. He said flatly that the patterns might be a map, not mere ornament. A map to something deeper within, or to something beyond imagining. His words froze the group. None wished to know if such a map led to safety or to ruin. Yet curiosity gripped them, and each forward step grew easier, even as fear gnawed at their hearts. Then the carvings themselves began to glow. Thin silver threads of light ran along the lines, spiraling outward until the whole pattern was alive. A deeper tone resonated, as if the stone itself exhaled. None dared move. They felt they stood before something beyond explanation, something no human hands could have made. Slowly, the glow spread outward, seeping into the mist. The fog rippled like disturbed water, and from within it, shapes appeared. Tall, shadowy figures, heads bowed as if listening to the same song. They did not approach, only stood at the edge of light, watching. Whether illusions, fog-born phantoms, or ancient beings lingering in darkness, none could tell. But all felt their presence like countless eyes fixed upon them. Symbols, light, song, and shadows all fused into one vision. None knew if it was invitation or snare, ancestral legacy or threshold to doom. But there was no turning back. The path now led only forward, into the brightening light and into the deepening mystery. The light, once only thin lines, now spread into a full radiance, flowing from the carvings to fill the fissure. What had seemed a narrow crack in the earth now became something like a doorknob of wood or iron, but of liquid light, shimmering silver, pale blue, and shifting green as the mist swirled. None could deny what they saw. It was real. The song changed. No longer a distant murmur, it now thrummed within their chests, as if each of them sang, though their lips remained closed. The tone stretched long, slowing time itself. The air grew dense, cold, yet strangely warm, and the door seemed to call silently, pulling mind and heart alike. Some shut their eyes, hoping it would vanish. Yet in the darkness behind their lids, the door shone even brighter. There was no escape from its image, had waited for them. Children hid, elders gazed with weary acceptance. They all knew this was beyond human measure. The mist moved with the song, swirling like a ritual. Shapes like hands appeared within it, not grasping, but pointing, guiding toward the light. Though fear anchored their feet, curiosity urged them forward. The elder planted his staff into the earth, waited for the song's pause, and said calmly that the door was no threat but a test. His words soothed some, though doubt lingered. Yet none could deny a force stronger than their own will was at work, a current impossible to resist. One by one, they stepped closer. At first, their feet dragged, then grew light as though burdens lifted from their shoulders. The door shimmered like water. A hand passed through it is a Lee feeling nothing, neither cold nor warmth, only an indescribable void. It was no natural thing. It was made by hands long gone, or by something greater still. The song grew louder, clearer now, as if countless voices waited beyond, calling them across. Before anyone dared step through, the mist erupted into a towering vortex. From within came another sound, not song, but a heavy, drawn-out breath, vast and living. Fear tightened their hearts. Whatever lay beyond would not be simple. Yet the door's pull remained. At last, without a word, the elder stepped forward. His body slipped into the light, vanishing as though dissolved in water. No scream, no struggle, only silence, and his staff falling to the ground. The door stood waiting, calm, inviting. And in the stillness, all knew. There would be no return. When the first among them stepped through the door of light, the world shifted. One by one, they followed, hesitant, resigned, or clutching children to their chests. Passing through felt like drifting, weightless. No falling, no pull. Only a seamless crossing between what had been and what now was. The space was vast, far greater than the cavern behind. Its walls gleamed smooth and silver, its ceiling high and veined with glowing lines like constellations. No torches burned, yet the place glowed with a gentle light of unknown source. The song no longer echoed, it was clearer now, as if sung by the walls themselves. Children stared wide-eyed. The floor bore great circles, intersecting and etched with strange yet familiar symbols. As feet touched the surface, it trembled faintly, answering their presence. Their voices, when they called the elder's name, returned altered, as though given back with hidden meanings. They walked on. Pillars rose in the distance, spiraling upward, carved with endless patterns. They halted in midair, never touching the ceiling, glowing faintly as if alive. Light pulsed within them, like veins carrying a current. The song grew deeper. It filled their bones, vibrating within their chests. Covering ears did nothing, the sound was inside them. They exchanged glances, realizing they were hearing with something beyond hearing, awakened in them by this place. Then the floor lit up. The circles burned with light, tracing a vast symbol at the chamber's heart. From it rose forms, vapor thickened into shapes. They stood upright, but were not human. They were light, shifting faces that never settled into one. No one moved. The beings circled in rhythm, and with each step, the song swelled. Chests tightened, as though brimming to the edge. Tears came unbidden, streaming silently. A child slipped from his mother's grasp and walked forward. Her hands could not restrain him. He entered the circle, and at once the song ceased. Silence absolute fell, heavier than any sound. The figures bowed. Light cloaked the child, transforming him. All stood breathless. None knew what this meant, yet all felt it. This was not a cavern. It was a place that had waited long ages for them, and perhaps the child was its long-awaited key. The child stood within the circle of light, his small body immersed in the glowing tide. His eyes were wide yet vacant, as if seeing what no one else could. The luminous figures slowed, closing the circle tighter around him. Their movements made no sound, only ripples of light that trembled across the carved floor. From within him, light began to seep, not reflected, but born from his own body. His hands lifted, palms glowing, threads of brilliance linking him to the figures. A deep vibration filled the space, like the heartbeat of the earth. The people felt it in their chests. Some fell to their knees, others covered their faces, others simply stared. The beings raised a dome of light above the child, symbols alive and shifting across its surface. A whisper came, timeless and ungraspable, yet piercing directly into each heart. The child spoke. His voice was soft, yet carried weight far beyond his years. He spoke of a lost path, of ancestors waiting, of a gate to be guarded. None understood fully, yet none doubted its truth. A man tried to approach, but was hurled back by an unseen barrier. He gasped that voices had warned him not to interfere. None dared again. Time became strange. Minutes stretched to hours, hours to days. Some grew drowsy, lulled by a heaviness, as though sleep was required for their souls to listen. The light around the child dimmed. One by one, the beings dissolved into air. The dome collapsed into sparks that rained and vanished. The child fell unconscious. His mother embraced him at last. But silence now was different. The air was dense, as though filled with unseen weight. All knew they had witnessed something beyond words, gift or warning, beginning or end. And when one turned, the door of light had returned, quivering softly, as if calling them onward. Yet none knew if it led back home or to another place entirely. The door of light pulsed gently, as if breathing, glowing and fading in slow rhythm. The people stared with relief and dread, for though the way home seemed to open, none could know what lay beyond. Would it lead them back to the forest and soil they knew, or to another realm altogether? An elder rose, white-haired and lined with years, his eyes still clear. He gazed long at the light, then at the child asleep in his mother's arms. He said the doorway was both a path and a trial, and that to step forward with doubt would make doubt itself their burden. A young woman trembled, suggesting they wait. But the elder shook his head. Time would not wait. This space was outside the world, and the longer they lingered, the more their memories would fade. Already some could no longer recall the faces of loved ones, the scent of home, the winding paths they once knew. Fear thickened. What if staying erased all memory, binding them forever here? Some wept, others clutched hands tightly, struggling not to break. A young man approached the door. The warmth of its glow touched his face. He looked back once, reached out his hand, and in a blink, he was gone. No sound, no trace, only silence heavier than before. Then the elder himself walked forward, smiling faintly. He too vanished into light, without struggle. The silence after was denser still. Some stepped forward, some remained, torn between terror and longing. The sleeping child sighed softly, as though knowing more than those awake. The door pulsed, waiting. No one knew what awaited, yet all understood that in that moment, in that silent, glowing chamber, their lives balanced on a single choice. Step forward or stay behind until forgotten by the world outside. The radiant chamber now bore silent witness to division. The silence was no longer empty, but tense, pressing each soul inward. Those who dared to approach the door gazed at its glow, as if seeing a long-lost home. Hope and fear mingled on their faces. Others huddled close, eyes closed, hands clasped, clinging to delay as if silence itself could postpone the inevitable. The mother still cradled her child in the center. The boy slept peacefully despite the weight of fear around him. Some looked at him, waiting for a sign, believing he was the key to the mystery. But the mother spoke nothing, only held him tighter. From the standing group, one by one stepped forward. Some with firm strides, others halting, glancing back before being swallowed by light. The door absorbed them gently, without sound, without struggle. Watching this filled the rest with both envy and dread. Those who remained clung to reasons. Some whispered the doorway was a trap, a prison of souls. Others murmured that the outside world no longer existed, that the glow was only illusion. Yet, even in their voices, doubt trembled. A young man who once resisted rose, eyes red, body shaking. He glanced at a woman he loved, gave a faint smile of farewell, and stepped into the light. She ran to stop him, but was too late. His body was gone, and she collapsed in grief upon the glowing floor. The group that stayed grew smaller. Each departure left them more isolated, yet some felt a strange defiance, as if refusal itself was a stance against some greater force. It was not certain, but it was all they had. Then the doorway pulsed stronger, no longer breathing softly, but pounding like a heartbeat, pressing against their chests. The choice could wait no longer. Some rose to enter, others sank back in resignation. At last, two groups remained. Those who had gone into the unknown, and those who stayed, sitting in a weary circle, resigned to face whatever awaited. And still, the child slept peacefully, as if untouched by change. The radiant chamber began to change. After many entered, the once gentle glow dimmed, as if the doorway had consumed enough souls. Those who remained felt the chill seep into their bones. Shadows deepened on their weary faces. The sleeping child stirred, reaching in his dreams, and his mother's tears fell as she wondered if the gesture was omen or illusion. Whispers rose among the survivors. Some claimed the doorway would close forever. Others believed it was but one of many. None knew the truth. Their words were frail anchors, fragile supports to keep despair away. Human history had always been shaped by such choices to go forward into the unknown or to remain and rebuild. But now, they did not even know if a world beyond this chamber existed at all. An old man stood, his hair white, his frame thin, his voice rough. He said mankind had always chased light from fire, from torches from the sun and stars. Light always carried both promise and threat. And perhaps, he whispered, those who entered had simply returned to a cycle that never ends. Then he sat again, exhausted. The doorway faded to a faint ember's glow. Hearts raced, not with bravery or fear, but with the awareness that choice itself was slipping from their grasp. The chamber seemed to hold its own will. The child awoke, his eyes opened slowly, blank yet deep. All eyes fixed on him, expecting a word. He only smiled faintly, a smile impossible to interpret. Joy, wisdom, or simply the reflex of waking, no one knew. His mother kissed his forehead and closed her eyes, surrendering all to time. At last, the doorway vanished. The wall was bare, no portal, no escape. Those who had entered were gone. Those who stayed remained with nothing but themselves, the child and a chamber that still seemed alive. They sat in silence, waiting. And thus ended their daily tale. No certain answers, no victory, no defeat. Only choices that left fading traces, like the charcoal of ancient hearths, the cave drawings, or scattered bones. We can only guess. Perhaps they vanished. Perhaps they continued elsewhere. Or perhaps they were part of an endless cycle. No one truly knows. Only mystery remained, wrapping time in silence. As time inside that chamber moved without direction, the sense of hours and days dissolved. There was no sign of sun, no ringing of bells, only a silence that pulsed unmeasured and immeasurable. Those seated there began to feel they had been inside far longer than possible, though their bodies bore no signs of hunger or fatigue. Their eyes remained clear, their breathing steady, as if time in that place obeyed different laws. One tried to count the seconds silently, but the count always broke apart, interrupted by shadows or brief glimmers of light that appeared and vanished without cause. Amidst the confusion, some began to tell memories not for comfort, but to anchor themselves. A young woman spoke of her village ringed by forests, of the stream flowing nearby, of the scent of earth after the first rain. Her voice was flat, yet the images painted were vivid, as if listeners saw it themselves, though they knew they were still within darkness. When she finished, an old man recalled his youth. A market filled with colors, coins striking wooden tables, cloth hung in long rows. These stories floated in the air like echoes before merging back into the silence that prevailed. Yet, the longer they spoke, the more they felt something was listening. Not merely the others, but something else. Each word spoken, each sentence uttered, seemed to vanish, not into ears, but into the walls themselves. The chamber felt like a vessel gathering tales, storing them, perhaps to repeat them one day to someone else. Some stopped speaking, uneasy that their words no longer belonged to them once released. They chose silence, though unspoken phrases continued forming within. The unease deepened when a man sitting in the corner felt the wall behind him pulse faintly. He leaned against it for a moment, then recoiled, pale, stammering that the wall was breathing. The others watched, then instinctively pressed their palms to the stone around them. Some felt only cold, some a faint vibration, and some swore the walls rose and fell, like the chest of a sleeping creature. No one said more, but all understood the same. The chamber was not empty. It was alive, or held life in ways they could not comprehend. The child, silent until then, spoke a single sentence, soft but clear, that the chamber was listening. None replied. None dared correct him. The simplicity of the statement was too precise to deny. His mother embraced him, tears in her eyes, but she did not hush him. She seemed to know his voice was closer to truth than the speculations of grown men. The mystery deepened, pressing upon them, yet calming in its own strange way. None tried to flee, none resisted. They only sat, listening, waiting, as if they knew what was unfolding was beyond their will. Something not to be stopped, but witnessed. In that slow rhythm they yielded, allowing the mystery to envelop them, knowing they might leave not with answers, but with stories that would hang forever in silence. Inside that living chamber, silence thickened, almost like a fog, though no mist could be seen. They felt each breath grow heavier, not from lack of air, but from some unseen layer hanging between them and the walls. It was like being underwater, where sound and movement slowed, yet awareness sharpened. A man felt his heartbeat slow, as if adjusting to the rhythm of the room, and wondered if his body was merging with something larger than himself. The sound returned, not from one direction, but from every side at once, like an echo with no origin. It was not words, but a tone so low it was like the earth trembling before a quake, creeping into their bones. Everyone knew it could not be ignored, though none understood it. The child who had spoken earlier closed his eyes, his face calm, as if it were a lullaby. His mother trembled, wanting to cover his ears, but fearing the act might be taken as rejection by whatever was listening. They realized time in that place was not only different, but severed from the world outside. Perhaps days had passed beyond, or only an instant. There was no way to tell. The thought made them surrender more deeply, no longer wanderers trapped, but parts of a ritual enacted without their consent. Some prayed silently, though their prayers felt suspended, neither rising nor falling, only circling within their chests before vanishing into the chamber's pulse. Then one of them noticed something on the wall, a faint shimmer like moonlight caught on stone. They leaned closer and saw it clearly, light reflecting from no torch, no body. A point of light, small but distinct, drifting like a spark, seeking a path. They stared, and the longer they looked, the more it seemed to look back. Not an eye, not a face, but presence equal to a gaze. An old man rasped that perhaps it was the room speaking not with words, but with light. No one laughed, for they all felt it too. The glow trembled, pulsed, rising and falling with their breathing, or perhaps their breathing had fallen into step with it. Slowly, without knowing who began, they matched their breaths to the glow, inhaling and exhaling together. They moved as one, as if praying without words. Some closed their eyes, not from fatigue, but to dissolve deeper into the rhythm. With eyes shut, the low sound grew clearer, no longer vague, but patterned, a chant never taught to mankind. It filled their heads, carrying both calm and fear, for they could not tell if it was message or emptiness itself embracing them. Yet within that fear was safety, as if they had finally reached a place that had long awaited them. When they opened their eyes, the chamber seemed larger, though unchanged. The walls appeared farther, the ceiling higher, and the glow had multiplied from one point to dozens, drifting like slow fireflies. They stared in silence, recognizing this was no mere space, but something holding a secret deeper than comprehension. None dared speak again. They knew words would only be swallowed by the stone, while silence might be the only way to remain accepted by the mystery enfolding them. As the floating lights multiplied, those inside felt they were no longer mere wanderers, but part of something that had been happening long before them. The lights drifted gently, not like the wild flames of torches, but in order, like a heartbeat or a river's current, as if they carried awareness. Children watched wide-eyed, some frightened, some entranced, while adults tried to interpret what they saw, though no one could truly answer. Each light seemed like a shard of memory adrift, or perhaps souls still lingering within the stone, refusing to vanish entirely. A woman seated near the wall felt something stir in her hand. She raised her palm slowly, and the nearest light drifted toward her, drawn as if by the warmth of her skin. It hovered above her hand, never touching, yet so tangible it made her skin bristle. She held her breath, frozen, while the others stared. The light pulsed, syncing with her heartbeat, and for a moment all felt it was not merely light, but a consciousness reaching out. There was no voice, no language, yet the feeling was undeniable, like a message without words. The woman felt as though she was being asked something, though she could not know what. She closed her eyes, emptying her thoughts, and suddenly tears streamed down her face, not from fear, but from a strange wave of emotion. Loss, longing, and acceptance mingled together. The light quivered, then slowly drifted away, merging back with the others, leaving behind a faint warmth on her palm, like a touch that would never fade. The moment left them in deeper silence. None dared speak, not even to ask what had just occurred. They knew words would break the stillness and perhaps fracture the fragile bond formed between themselves and the incomprehensible. So they only watched, letting the lights drift, letting the timeless flow move unmeasured. Yet silence did not mean nothing happened. Within it, each felt a change stir inside. A man burdened with anger felt his chest lighten, as if long-carried weight had slipped away. A woman haunted by nightmares suddenly felt her eyes closing, unafraid of darkness for the first time in years. A sickly child felt warmth spread through his body, as if the lights had given something no world outside could. They all realized the chamber was not merely space, but a bridge between life and what lies beyond it, between memory alive and memory drowned. The lights might be markers, guardians, or endless remnants of energy. No one knew, and perhaps no one needed to. The longer they remained, the more they understood this mystery was not meant to be solved, but embraced. And as that realization deepened, the room changed once more. The scattered lights began gathering in the center, forming a faint circle like a whirlpool suspended in air. The circle turned slowly, and within it new sparks appeared, brighter, denser, as though the core of all the lights had chosen to reveal itself. They held their breath, some wishing to retreat, some wishing to approach, but none dared move. They only knew they were standing at the edge of something vast, something they might never be able to tell anyone beyond these walls. The circle of light in the center of the chamber grew tighter, swirling like a whirlpool suspended in the air, yet without a single sound. From within the vortex, denser gleams emerged, almost forming recognizable shapes, though never fully clear. It was as if the light were trying to mimic forms that once existed, or showing shadows of things lost thousands of years ago. The people inside the cave froze, their bodies stiff, yet their eyes could not look away. Fear, awe, and wonder blended into a single quiet tension binding them. Over time, the glow within the whirlpool began shaping into vague silhouettes. It was uncertain whether they were human, animal, or merely illusions born from weary minds. Yet each felt the form spoke directly into their hearts. A man saw his grandmother long gone, while a small child thought she glimpsed the mother who often left her alone. Each gaze revealed something different, as if the light was not an object, but a mirror reflecting their deepest longing. The air around the vortex grew warmer, though the cave should have been cold. Their breaths grew heavier, yet soothing, like drifting asleep in a beloved's embrace. No words were spoken, yet all felt no longer alone. They felt accompanied by something unexplainable, something perhaps older than history itself. The scattered lights now gathered, orbiting the vortex, forming an outer circle like stars surrounding a sun. The vision was beautiful yet frightening, for beauty to foreign often stirs dread. A woman covered her face with both hands, afraid of seeing more than she could endure. Yet even with closed eyes, she felt the lights as though they entered her mind without needing sight. The change lasted long, though time in the cave did not move as it did outside. None knew whether an hour, a day, or more had passed. They were only trapped in the sense that this was something they must endure, something they could never simply walk away from. Some tried to pray, though their prayers no longer aimed at any god or spirit, but became nameless offerings of gratitude or pleas addressed to the light itself. When the vortex reached its brightest point, a faint sound emerged, not human, not natural, but a vibration resonating directly within their chests. The sound carried no words, yet all understood the same meaning. A warning, or perhaps an invitation. Their hearts pounded, some wanting to flee, others longing to remain forever, as though the light offered a choice never spoken. Before they could decide, the vortex began to fade. The dense glow unraveled into thousands of tiny sparks, scattering, some clinging to the cave walls, others vanishing into nothing. The circle collapsed slowly, leaving behind a silence deeper than before. They looked at one another, realizing they had witnessed something that might never return. None dared speak, for words would never suffice. What remained was a peculiar stillness, as though the cave had taken something from them, yet at the same time bestowed something beyond measure. After the light vanished, the cave returned to deep darkness, with only faint embers from nearly dying torches. Yet the silence that followed was not the same as before. It carried an invisible resonance, a silence not of emptiness, but of meaning. The people remained still, some with eyes closed, others staring blankly into the dark, as if still trying to grasp what had just happened. Their breaths felt different, slower, deeper, as though a new rhythm had been given to them by the cave itself. Some began to move slowly, reaching out to the walls, trying to confirm that what they had witnessed was not merely a deceptive dream. Their hands touched the cold stone, hard and scarred by time, yet in their minds it still felt warm, as if the walls retained traces of the light that had once swirled in the center. Each touch carried the subtle sense that the rock was a witness to something that had occurred countless times through millennia. Perhaps the light was no new phenomenon, but something that had returned over and over, never recorded, never carried beyond the cave's darkness. In one corner, an old man began to murmur, his voice soft yet clear. He was not speaking to the others, but to the cave itself. His words were neither prayer nor song, but a stream of sounds born spontaneously. The others listened, and without realizing, the murmur seeped into their ears and calmed their unrest. Some joined him, their voices blending into a low hum resembling the earth's vibration. There was no leader, no order, yet the sound flowed naturally, as if guided by the cave itself. Outside, the moon still shone, but the light entering through narrow cracks seemed dimmer than before, as if the outer world was now only a shadow, while the cave had become the true center of their existence. One person tried walking toward the exit, but his steps felt heavy, as if held back. He stopped midway, turned, and returned to sit with the others. No one laughed, no one reproached, for all felt the same. There was something in the cave binding them, making them unwilling to leave, though they knew beyond its walls awaited family, life, and obligations. That feeling bound them tighter, as if the cave was no longer an empty stone hollow, but a vast breathing body holding secrets and memory. Every droplet falling from stalactites sounded like a heartbeat, every whisper of air like a breath. No one could tell if this was imagination's trick or if the cave truly lived in its own way. Yet within the silence, a certainty slowly grew that they were part of something far greater. Some began to weep soundlessly, not from sorrow, but because they felt touched by something beyond words. Their tears fell onto the damp soil, mingling with water already there. No one comforted, no one asked, for all knew those tears were not weakness, but the truest response to the mystery they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, others simply sat quietly, eyes closed, allowing the weight and lightness of it to fill their entire being. As time passed, the murmur of the old man weakened, and the voices of the others slowly faded until silence returned. Yet it was a silence different than before, deeper, denser, fuller. They realized that perhaps the light had gone, yet the echo of it remained, not only within the cave, but within themselves. Something had shifted, though they could not name it. They knew that once they left the cave, the outside world would no longer feel the same, and perhaps they themselves would no longer be the same. As the night deepened, the sense of time seemed to stop within the cave. No one knew how long they had been sitting, how long the torches had lasted, or how long the light had swirled before them. Seconds lost their meaning, minutes and hours dissolved, leaving only the sensation of being trapped between two worlds, the one they knew outside, and another, unreachable yet strongly present within the stone chamber. Some began to lie down, not from weariness, but because their bodies felt the need to press against the earth, as though the ground itself was calling them back. Their eyes were half open, not fully awake, as if drifting between sleep and wakefulness, between reality and something else. The old man who had murmured earlier was now completely silent. His face looked calm, his eyes empty yet full, as though seeing something invisible to others. Nearby, a small child clung to his mother, tiny hands grasping the edge of worn cloth. Unblinking eyes fixed on the cave wall that remained dark. There was a soothing silence, yet it carried a tension that could not be explained. Like waiting for something that might happen, nor might never come again. Outside the cave, the night wind blew, carrying the voices of the forest. Night birds occasionally cried, insects whispered. Yet all sounded distant, faint, as if those sounds could not fully penetrate the stone walls. Only the echo within the cave felt real, an echo not of sound, but of feeling. Everyone was now submerged in that sensation, bound by something unseen, yet undeniable. One of them finally whispered softly, barely audible. He said the light might not have come from outside, but from within themselves, merely reflected by the cave so they could see it. The words were neither answered nor denied, simply left to drift in the air before slowly sinking into the hearts of all. The thought was strange, yet felt true. As though the cave was indeed created to be a mirror not just for the body, but for the soul. Time flowed on without direction. Some began to close their eyes, allowing themselves to sleep amidst the silence, while others remained awake, sitting upright, staring into the dark, as if hoping something else might appear. No one knew when they should leave, or if they truly wanted to leave. The cave had become a second home, a place where boundaries between human and mystery were no longer clear. In the end, all realized that this night would remain within them forever. Not as a story easily retold, not as a tale written in words, but as an experience that could only be felt. The light might never appear again, or perhaps it would come to the next generation. But tonight, beneath the unseen moonlight outside, they had become witnesses to something beyond reason and beyond language. In the end, the night slowly shifted toward dawn, though from within the cave there was no sign of sunlight breaking through. They felt the change only as a faint whisper, as though the earth itself breathed with a different rhythm, lighter, fresher, yet still full of mystery. No one stood up immediately. No one rushed to leave, for all knew that once they stepped back outside, into the world of light, something would remain behind. Something that could not be carried away, could not be explained in words, only remembered in silence. The children who had grown drowsy the night before now awoke with weary eyes, yet quiet, as though they had just dreamed a long dream they could not tell. The adults looked at one another without speaking, only with small nods enough to convey that they had all seen the same thing, though perhaps in different ways. The torchlight faded slowly, leaving only a thin smoke drifting with the damp cave air. And in that fading glow, all knew the night's journey had ended. Yet it was within that fading that the mystery endured. No one knew where the light had come from, or whether it had been light at all. No one knew what prayer had echoed, or who had first called it. No one knew whether the cave was merely stone carved by time, or a doorway into something greater. Those questions remained like shadows unwilling to vanish, clinging to the hearts of all who had once entered. They finally stepped out one by one, leaving darkness to meet the morning light. Fresh air struck their faces, carrying the scent of wet earth and leaves sparkling with dew. Yet behind that relief lingered a strange feeling, as though the cave still watched them from behind, guarding secrets that would never fully be revealed. Some glanced back before walking further, but none dared to enter again, at least not that day. The cave stood still, silent, cold, waiting. Perhaps others would come. Perhaps another generation would grow curious. Or perhaps the cave would continue swallowing time alone until at last it was forgotten. But for those who had once sat within it, listening to its quiet whisper, watching light without a source, the cave would always remain alive. Not on maps, not in records, but in memory passed from mouth to mouth, from dream to dream. And if one night, thousands of years later, someone returned to its mouth, perhaps they would find the same thing, or something different, or perhaps nothing at all. For true mystery is not about the answer, but about the very presence of the question. The cave never offered certainty, only silence, and in that silence, humanity could feel itself both small and eternal. So rest peacefully. Let this tale continue to echo in stillness, like the whisper of the cave that never dies. Sleep with a gentle curiosity, for no one truly knows the answer. And perhaps it is better if the mystery remains within the dark.